Ah yes, the eternity-old discussion about 2D versus 3D. Be it in the context of animation, I'm looking at you, Disney, or in the world of game development, it seems that this fight over which medium is better will never stop. In one of my recent videos, I talked about planning your first game, how to do it, and of course, I also talked about styling. One of the early parts of deciding how your game is gonna look is deciding if it's gonna be a 2D or a 3D game. This is one of the earliest things that you have to figure out when planning your game. But why? Well, when making a game, one of the first things you have to decide is what game engine you want to use. Some game engines are absolute beasts when it comes to 3D games, like Unreal or Unity, while others are very good at making 2D games, like Game Maker, Godot, and Unity. Yep, that's right, Unity can do both. And yes, you can make a 3D game using Godot and Game Maker as well, it's just not as optimized, I'd say. Not as easy as with the other game engines. So let's say you want to play it safe and you go with Unity, because you can do both. But then there's the problem. When you open a new project in Unity, it's going to ask you one singular thing. Is it going to be a 3D game? Is it going to be a 2D game? Mobile game, VR experience, all of those things. So you still have to decide pretty early. Okay, but let's say again, that doesn't matter and you just wanna figure it out as you go. Well, then the discussion doesn't end with the game engine. It continues with the programming, the texturing, the lighting, physics, everything. Everything is based on if your game is going to be a 2D or a 3D experience. So you have to know what you want. So how do you do that? What are the differences? A 2D game works like a plane. Think of a page in a book. You can write on top of it and go left, right, up or down. But you can go back or forth. That will make you go through the paper itself. And that's when it becomes a 3D game. When you have the need to go up, down, left and right, and back and forth. Again, going back to the example with the book, you don't only have one page of the book, you have multiple pages and you can go from, let's say, page 1 to page 100. So 2D games, let's start with that. Most of 2D games are puzzlers, platformers, clickers, but you don't have to get stuck inside that mentality. You can make a 2D game be whatever you want. It just depends on how you approach it and what you make of it. Of course, if you want to make a first-person shooter, then going 2D might be pretty hard. You might have to go 2.5D. Yeah, that's an option, by the way. You can go 2.5. But let's stay on track. Going back to the differences. Let's start with the implementation. A lot of people might say that 2D can be easier than 3D, but I would argue that both are complicated in their own ways. For instance, modeling good-looking characters for your 3D game can be a pain, but it can be just as much as a hustle to try to make a good-looking, stylized landscape in 2D. I think making sprites for a platformer can be very satisfying, but extremely tedious. 3D is generally considered to have more complex visuals, but 2D can be just as complex, and the mechanics just as complex as 3D. It's not about how hard they are to make. They are both hard to make and implement. It's just that you implement them in different ways. Sure, you can argue that 3D is more complicated because you have to model them, you have to texture them differently, the models, the characters, the environments, while for 2D you can just make sprites and that's it. You just make, let's say, a rectangular cube and that's the game. Well, yeah, that works, but that works just as well in 3D. So let's say you are bad at both. You cannot draw for your life and modeling in Blender is just so fucking complicated. What do? An easy solution for all of that is outsourcing your visuals. That means buying your models and landscaping, sprites, whatever you want to use from an asset store. For example, from the Unity asset store. I have no affiliation with Unity. I personally use Unreal as of now for my games, but I did start my game development journey with Unity. And because I started with Unity, I did make projects in Unity. I made a 2D game and I made a demo for a 3D game. I do not have those games anymore. I only have like videos of what I made and notes that I had from that time because it was a very long time ago. But I can for sure show you some stuff from those videos back then. All of the visuals you see in these videos are just from the Unity asset store. Everything is bought except the grass that I made myself. I drew that myself, and that one barrel you're gonna see at some point. I love that barrel. I think a pro for 2D games is that they can better translate into a warm and fuzzy feeling. In my opinion, it's easier to make 2D games that feel warm, that feel fuzzy, comfy, that are comforting. Of course, there are 3D games out there that are warm and fuzzy. I know Animal Crossing is a thing. Please don't type in the comments, oh, but there is Animal Crossing and then this game and this game. Yes, of course, those games do exist. I'm not saying that it's impossible to make a 3D game look, feel, and be fuzzy. I'm just saying 2D, it's easier to implement. In 2D, it's easier to have a very fuzzy, warm style with warm colors. 3D, usually it's harder because you have to like work with the skybox, make the lighting warmer, make that warmer. You can't really add fuzziness to 3D as easily as you can just draw little lines on sprites in a 2D setting. So yes, you can make fuzzy looking games even if they are 3D. It's just not as easy. You can still make that, but most 3D games go for a sharp, realistic feel. A lot of them do that. Of course, there is the whole genre of low poly that's stylized and looks more approachable, I guess. But most 3D games, and I'm coming from a place of playing a lot of survival 3D games, survival horror games, and all of that. Most of them do go for the more realistic look. Look at 7 Days to Die, look at DayZ, look at COD, of course. Look at Counter-Strike, look at Green Hell, look at all of those games. They are not really that stylized. They go for a sharp, realistic look. But does that mean that 2D games cannot be difficult mechanics-wise or realistic? Hell no. Look at RimWorld, look at Oxygen Not Included, look at Don't Starve. They look kinda cartoonish, but if you play those games you would know, brother, they are not easy. Even though they are difficult, they have a specific visual style. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I wouldn't wanna play Don't Starve anymore if it didn't have that cartoony gritty style. It just works so well. Oh, and there is 60 Seconds. It's a game that came out in 2015 and it just decided it's going to do both. If you're not familiar with the game, you spend the first 60 seconds of the game running around a 3D map, going around your house and gathering things, preparing for the apocalypse. Afterwards, you seal yourself with your family in a bunker and then everything becomes 2D, which helps a lot with the storytelling of this game. It just works. And sometimes that's exactly what happens. Sometimes it just works. Sometimes you have to use both, make it 2D and 3D at the same time. Actually, let's go back to the 2.5. Let me correct something. Don't Starve, it's a 2.5D game. The map itself is a 3D space as much as I know, and the characters themselves, or the stuff around the map, 2D. Another example of a great 2.5 game, 2D.5 game, it's Little Nightmares. Well, kinda. You could consider it a 3D platformer, even though most backgrounds and characters are 3D models. The game plays itself as a 2D mostly. Alright, so I've been talking a lot about games being 2D or 3D or even 2.5D. And frankly, there's no easy way to tell which one is the best for you. It can depend on every single little aspect that you wanna implement in your game. So now what? Well, it becomes a personal matter. It all comes down to you. If you are good at drawing or pixel art in general, if you are good at pixel art or just like drawing in general, you might find drawing sprites for your game very natural and satisfying. while sculpting 3D models might represent a challenge. And if you're generally not good at drawing or like visual work, you can still use shapes to tell a story. Whichever it is, your strengths and weaknesses are going to decide for you, unless you want to embrace a challenge and learn everything anew. So what about me? Well, I'm making a 3D game that's extremely stylized. Well, not extremely stylized, but it's very stylized, and frankly, I want to make it look kinda like a cartoon. Here are some shots, but remember, I'm very early in development and I feel like I didn't achieve anything in the past few months. So the conclusion, as I said in my last video, don't make it complicated. Make it yours. Don't overthink it. Try both and see what you prefer. For me, it was clear from the beginning that I wanted a 3D game. If for you it isn't yet, look at what games you play. Try to maybe copy one, make a clone out of it, see how you like it, try again if you don't. And remember, if you start a 2D or a 3D game or project or whatever, and just mid-road you decide you want it to be the opposite, you want a 3D to become a 2D and a 2D to become a 3D, that's gonna be very hard to implement. So please, for the love of God, decide at the beginning or start anew when you decide, oh, I actually prefer the opposite. It's okay to start anew. It's okay to start new projects. It's okay to abandon older projects if you feel like it doesn't get you anywhere. It's not a shame to let go. Sometimes you have to, but that's alright. Good, go make games. Ember out. That's it. That's it.